Jazz is a four-letter word. Jazz is a four-letter word. Jazz is a four-letter word. It's not either or. It's not either or. It's a this and that, 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 this and that.
Let's get to our theme of Blossom and our speaker today. Her name is Michelle Savage. She is an international best-selling author. I mean, that's pretty cool just to say international before. Yeah, right. She's a keynote speaker and the founder of Sulit Press. Did I say? Sulit. Okay, I should have asked beforehand. But Sulit Press, which is a boutique publishing house where she helps people tell the story that they've always wanted to tell. And she's got a unique approach to that. I'm sure she'll mention that. But she's got a passion for helping women, especially women, share their unique stories. She's fostered this close-knit community of authors who've leveraged those personal experiences to inspire and lead. To expand that, she's not resting on the publishing laurels. She's gone further into the podcasting world where she has started Her Best Chapter. See what she did there? She's a writer. She played on words. Her Best Chapter, which is a podcast where she continues to amplify those women's voices. Her work is grounded in the idea that everyone has a powerful story worth telling, and she revels in telling them, or helping them write it well, sorry. Here to share her perspective on today's theme of Blossom and our always on theme of creativity, please help me welcome Michelle Savage.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Oh my gosh. Look at all these beautiful humans. Can you hear me? Okay. What a beautiful space. I feel like Mother Nature did us all a solid when this time of year, you don't know if it's going to rain from moment to moment. I am just reveling, honestly, in the beauty of this space and the opportunity to spend it with you. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for being here and letting me hang out with you for the next 20-ish minutes. I've been told 20. If you see Ben with the vaudevillian hook, it means I'm at like 25 minutes and I've gone over. So we'll do our best. I think I spend so much time in my speaking world talking about publishing and writing. And as I was talking to Ben about this idea of Blossom, he said, you get to just be the creative. You get to show up. And so that's what I'm going to do is give you sort of an overview snapshot of some creative moments throughout my life, a few of the lessons I've learned in hopes that there might be a takeaway, that hopefully a couple, but at least one takeaway for when you leave here today. And I really love this theme of Blossom because for much of my life, I felt like a late bloomer. Has anyone ever felt like that where you're like, I showed up late to the party, I missed the memo, that kind of feeling? It started, I would say, late elementary, middle school. But before that, I mean, that's a pretty young age to feel late, right? But before that, I was just like a weird little kid. And I just did stuff and made stuff and wore weird costumes without any care to whether or not what I was making was good or if someone else was going to pat me on the head and give me the gold star. I just reveled in having fun making things. I just wanted to know, what this outfit looked like, or if I shaved my Barbies' heads and sewed them a costume, what would happen. Created, performances on my front porch. And it was about that age, my mom was probably getting a little skeptical. And she said, Mickey, which was my little kid name, Mickey, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, well, I either want to be a nun or a singer and dancer in Reno. The illustrious world of Reno. Is anyone from Reno before I go further? At this moment, I was just thinking, I hope someone's like, yeah, Reno. And then they can tell me what's there because I still haven't been. So the nun thing was out because I'm not Catholic. And if you traced my life going back up to this point, there were also lots of other reasons I would have been disqualified, lots of demerits along the way. And I can't sing very well, so that was out. But dance took hold as my first passion. You know, that first seed that grows within you that you just know that that is the one thing you have to do. And more specifically for me, that was ballet. I don't know where it came from. I had never even been to a ballet, but I knew I had to do it. And so I begged my parents forever for lessons. And finally, we moved to Virginia from Montana, where they actually had dance academies. And they said, okay, we'll let you take classes. And I was so excited that very first day. And I slicked my hair into the bun and I threw on my leotard and I walked into beginner ballet level 1 and I was towering over everyone else in the class. I was towering. And so one of the ways I wasn't a late bloomer was I blossomed in puberty by 11, and at 11, I was already this size. But in beginner ballet, if you know anything about dance, you don't start at 11. You start when you're this size. And so I was in there with other 7 and 8-year-old little girls who knew what to do. And our teacher, Miss Shiflett, would say, all right, grand battement, rond de jambe, pirouette. And all I heard was, because I didn't even know the words in English, let alone in French, or what they looked like, or how to do them. And I felt like this sort of lumbering oaf. And for whatever reason, the idea to quit never crossed my mind. And so I only had one other option, and that was to do the work. And I took every class that I could get a ride to. My parents didn't know how much that was going to cost them. Thanks, Mom and Dad. Shout out. But I worked and I worked. I turned my garage into my dance studio. I used the backs of chairs in the kitchen. It was constant. I studied the French words. I did everything I could. And through a few years, I moved up and worked my way through all the ranks so that just 3 years later, at 14, I was in the top company, where I was finally getting roles I was really excited about. And I was then one of the youngest in the company, and many of the girls were much older than I was. And I remember in one rehearsal, I had danced for so many hours. This is gross for sensitive listeners, but I had filled my point shoe with so much blood that it blossomed blood all over the outside. And I gave it to my teacher and she held it up proudly like Simba. And I was like, yeah, I did that. And then she handed it back to me and she said, great job, but rehearsal's not over yet. So put it back on. And I was like, and I did. And it was about that time I went to the Kennedy Center and I auditioned for a couple of prestigious programs. I got into both of them, and it meant that I could see my ultimate dream coming true. It was just a skip and a hop right into professional ballet dancing in New York City, which was my ultimate dream. And so it was inevitable, right? I already had learned that what you focus on grows. Yeah, so easy. And then I met a boy. Those fellas come out of nowhere, don't they? And we were running around his front yard one evening, and I stepped in a hole, and I twisted my ankle and ripped the ligament, and that was it. And that whole dance dream was done. No more ballet. Every doctor said, you're done on point. That's it. And so at 14 years old, I was grieving the death of a dream. Have you felt that before, where you think that you're going in one direction and it stops? And there's a real grief that happens in that space. And I was also like, oh shit, I just peaked in high school. But it was only because I had not yet learned at that young age that we as humans, as creative beings, are not annuals. We don't blossom once and die forever. We bloom in seasons. And there are always going to be those in-betweens, that mulching phase when you're not in your full creative bloom, when you're in the darkness, when you've done the performance and then it's over, when you've had the gallery show and then it's done and you have to start again. Whatever that is for you in your life, it could be in relationships, it could be in whatever jobby job you have. There's always going to be that in-between dark mulching phase, and we've not been taught to honor that very well, I don't think. And it's not just that this is something that's outside of the creative process, it's actually a valuable, vital part of the creative process. It's in that dark mulching phase that we look at all that we've done and we gather all of the information and the lessons we've tuck them back in our satchel and take them with us onto the next adventure. And in that space, we also start to dabble again. We start to wait for that next creative spark to take hold so that we can then blossom again. And also in that space, we rest. And it's so necessary. And I am not a patient person. So I resist sometimes and I push against that time. But every time that I'm there, now I'm starting to ease into it with a little more less resistance. My mother loves to say, when things aren't going well for me, Michelle, this too shall pass. And I always hated it when she said that. And I was like, yeah, I know it's going to pass, but is it going to pass like I don't know, a chia seed or a kidney stone? I don't know. And she always used it when something was going wrong. But now I see those seasons of bloom, and as everything passes, when you're in full bloom, when you're blossoming at your highest, that will go away too. And so knowing that, I value it and I appreciate it in the moment while it's happening, just the same as I can now better appreciate those in-betweens, the mulching phase. And I hope that helps you if you're ever in that space. Now, skip forward ahead to college. I was 18 years old and I started dabbling again. And so I took a class in art metals and I took a class in welding. And this part I'm going to tell you now is a little embarrassing because I went home from college one day and I flipped on the TV and what came on? But Flashdance. And I was like, well, she can weld and she can dance. Damn it, I want to dance again. So I looked up, like in the Austin Chronicle dance classes, and I took my first modern class. And again, I was at the back of the pack, but I learned I could outwork it. And I did. And over the next years, I danced in an Austin company. I moved to Portland because I know that you have to go where you grow and surround yourself by people who are better than you. And when that was done at 23 years old, with one bag of clothes, no job, no apartment, no friends, a little bit of money, plus some money that I pulled off my credit card because I was also a late bloomer in personal finance, I moved to New York City. And I lived out my dance dream for 6.5 years as a modern dancer. And I got to choreograph and produce, and that was so much more fun and beautiful of an experience than I ever would have had I gone straight on ahead to a ballet program. I got to eat cheeseburgers for one. I didn't have to smoke a bunch of cigarettes to stay extra skinny. I just did that for fun. I guess that might go back to why I'm still not a nun, now that I think about it. And from there, I, did what every dancer does. They marry their choreographer. And 2 years later, right, I met a boy. That happened again, right? It was a man-aged boy this time. Still a boy. And, and 2 years after that, I was the one that was in full bloom with my son Joaquin. And at 29, it was much easier to let go of dance and move towards something else. It wasn't something that was removed for me. I had a much bigger creative project at hand to cultivate, the environment for a human to thrive. And it was very, very worth it. I've never honestly looked back at that choice. But at 2 years old, him, not me, when he was 2 years old, I became a single mom. And so I ended up just working and momming all the time to make ends meet. And it wasn't easy. And if anyone's done it, it's what you would expect. It's exhausting and inspiring, and you just leave it all in the field every day and you think, I don't know how I'm going to do it again, and you do. So at that point, I really wasn't tapping into what creative thing can I do or make from this space. And thankfully, it didn't necessarily mean that I had to dream it up, because that little minx, the muse, came back in and started whispering in my ear. And at first I was like, yeah, I'm kind of busy here. But her little whispers got louder and louder. And she said, hey, Michelle, do you remember when you were 8 years old and you turned your walk-in closet into a writing office? I was like, oh, yeah. That was stellar work I did in there. I was like, I made some flip books with stick figures, I think. And she said, well, remember when you used to lay in a sunny patch on the carpet all summer long reading books? I'm like, I did love that. And she said, yeah, and also, remember when you went to college for writing? And I was like, I did do that. She said, now is your time. Now it's time to write. And at that time, that dream had taken hold, but I had no idea how I was going to do it. I just said, okay, great, I'm game, but show me what you've got. And it was honestly almost miraculous. I met an editor for an online newspaper, and she said, "Why don't you just submit something?" And I did, and she published it. And I'm like, "Oh, it's like magic, my words, and people can read them." It felt so validating, but also I just couldn't believe that she accepted it. I was 32 at the time, and I'd never written anything publicly or professionally before. After submitting a few other publications, I ended up getting a job for that same editor later, and I had to compete against other journalists for the job. I'd never gone to journalism school. I'd only ever written and published a few articles before. And to get the job, I had to compete by writing an article about a city planning session, something I really didn't know anything about. I didn't know how to do it. And the next day, after I submitted my application, I got the call and she said, "We want you. And I can't tell you how many other people you beat out." And I said, "Well, that's interesting," because to myself, I said I didn't actually know what I was doing. She said, "Well, you didn't just go to the city planning meeting, you interviewed every neighbor and every shop owner along the street, and you put a human touch to that. We want that." And so, actually, not knowing what I was doing, not being trained in a specific way, benefited me for the first time in my life. And from there, I wrote hundreds of articles for that publication. I went far down the rabbit hole of content marketing, helping businesses put that right message to their mission, and I loved that work. And then I started working with authors to help them write and edit their books and to help them launch and market their books because I had that experience. And I would also act as a liaison with their publishing houses. And I was always shocked with the service that they got. I'm like, "You paid for this. This is terrible. You're a number." And I loved my authors. I wanted to love them all the way through the process. And even though I saw a gap in the market, I didn't want to fill it. At that point, I was so busy building my freelance business, and I felt like I was finally successful being able to use my gifts and talents to help others in a way that I thought was enjoyable to me, which was my whole purpose in whatever way I get to do that. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm full up. I can't take another client. This is awesome." And still, do you know that feeling like you see a bud and it's about to blossom, but it hasn't blossomed yet? And it starts to pull apart at the seams, and you can kind of just see that, like the pink, tulips coming through or the petals coming through. And that's how I felt. And I said, "I know there's something else I'm supposed to do, and I'm not quite sure what it is right now." And so I did what every extremely strategic business owner does. And I sat down on my meditation cushion and I said, "All right, universe, show me what you've got. Because I know there's something else that I'm supposed to be doing, and I don't know what it is." And it's never happened before or even since in this way, but instantaneously and very clearly, the message appeared in my brain: "Open a publishing house." And I said, "Ew, no." That sounds so hard, and I don't know how to do that, and I've never worked in publishing, and the excuses filled the room instantly, and I said, "Well, wait, hold on, I did just ask." And so I wrote out the business plan, and I hired on an incredible team of people who knew a whole lot more than I did to create the foundation for our programs, and just 3 years later, we just had our 3-year anniversary. We've now published 70 authors. Thank you. Um, so we're getting to help women share their stories, and that's really rewarding. We just started a podcast, which Ben was talking about, Her Best Chapter. We're about to host our second writing retreat in California. And all of that feels so good, and also, this too shall pass. And so I'm paying attention to it. Just like when I raised my son, I always said, "I don't want to miss this." And I didn't. I'm not missing this. And I know that it's not going to last forever. But I also know it's never too late to pivot, no matter where you are, that what you focus on grows, and that if you surround yourself with the right people and the right environment, like you all are obviously really good at by coming here and hanging out with each other, that you will thrive. Honor your in-betweens. If you are in that space where you're like, "I know I could be more in blossom, in the bloom of my full creative expression," you're not quite there, or you're not quite sure what's next, honor that time. Be kind to yourself. And also, I warn, don't get too comfy in there. because that's where those excuses come in. And I've seen it happen so many times. I've experienced it myself, that if you're not thriving and it's not just a pause, it's not because you don't have the skill or the talent, that you started too late, that you don't have the right money or the education or the right opportunities, or you don't know the right people. It's because you're being a chicken. I always tell my writers, listen, ladies, writing's not for weenies. And they laugh. And then they come back and they're like, oh my gosh, you're not kidding. Because that's what it takes, right? It takes a bit of courage to keep putting yourself out there, to keep, every time you blossom, you have to deal with the wind. It's a lot easier and safer to stay where you're comfortable and small, and nobody in here wants that, because this life passes. And how do we want to leave it? What kind of mark do we want to leave? I've gone back to focusing a lot more on, how did little Mickey live? When not everything is about achievement and goal and performance. And I'm having a lot more fun writing a book of essays. I'm about to take a photography class in a couple of weeks. And I just know that it may never be good, and that's okay. You know, my dad always said, he did not say this too shall pass. My dad always said, remember this day. And he always said it in moments when it was sort of a pivotal turning point. Like when we were leaving a house, looking around the house for the last time, and the boxes are on the truck and it's empty. And he would say, girls, look around and remember this day. Be present to this day. And I never forget those days. And I hope that today, in this beautiful garden, you take a minute to honor wherever you are in your creative journey. And you remember this day, not because I'm here, but because you are. Thank you so much.